The following interview is part of the USMC Vietnam Tankers Association History Project. The interview is being conducted at the VTA reunion in St. Louis, Missouri, September 24, 2017. Interviewees are members of the VTA. The purpose of the History Project and the interviews is to capture the experiences of our Vietnam veterans and make them available for future generations.
All right, I'm Rick Lewis, and I'm a member of the Vietnam Tankers Association. I'm currently, somehow got reelected vice president again. But what I'd like to do right now is, I think one thing that might be missing in all our interviews, and when people come up on the street and meet me and say thank you for your service, ask me what unit I was in or something, I'll say the Marine Corps, and I'll say tanks, and they go, tanks? You had tanks over there? There were tanks there? So what I'd like to do is, maybe for people who come on our website and look at the interviews, is actually tell you a little bit about the M48A3 Patton tank. A tank in the United States since 1953 up till the 90s. This tank was primarily manufactured by Chrysler, Fisher Body, Ford Motor Company, and to my surprise, American Locomotive Company. There was actually 12,000 M48 made originally. The tank went from 48 tons to 54 tons combat loaded. In Vietnam, the tanks underwent a major modification and became known as the M48A3 Mod B Patton tank. And that modification was they raised the cupola. I remember being there actually on my tank, we were helping the retriever lift the cupola up and put the ring on, and thinking what an advantage that gave us. And at the same time, we received the new radio set, which now allowed us to talk to the grunts, each other, and even the air. Before that was impossible, let alone even talk within the crew. The other modification, we went from the 18-inch searchlight to the Xeon searchlight. And unfortunately, one of the things they forgot is, even with the cupola-mounted 50 cal machine gun, or when that got switched and it was a 30 cal, and you were shooting, we originally did not have the interrupter bar to make sure that the Xeon searchlight didn't get shot out. And that came later, adding the interrupter bar, so you could not shoot your searchlight out. So, the M48A3 battle tank has seen more wars than the other tank ever manufactured. It has been in 15 wars. Now, obviously not all those are by the United States, but we, being the United States of America, furnished all our allies with tanks all over the world. The M48 has served and has been a very victorious tank. The armament of an M48A3, the main gun is a 90mm gun. This was deliberately designed because of the German capability in World War II with the 88 was devastating. They had over a 300-yard advantage against our M4 Sheridan medium tanks in the war, and obviously devastated a lot of our tanks, but by pure volume, we succeeded in that. The tank normally has a 30 cal machine gun that is coaxially mounted. That means if this is the main gun and this is the machine gun, anywhere the main gun goes, the coaxial machine gun moves with it. The other piece of armament is a 50 cal Browning machine gun, a weapon that has been around forever and is still with us today in the modern Marine Corps and other armed forces. It was originally designed to be an anti-aircraft gun, and it was mounted in the cupola and only had a 50-round capability. It was not the most ideal mount for it, and pretty much jammed all the time. Each crewman was armed with a 45 1911 ACP that was used mainly if you had to abandon a tank, or as in Vietnam, a lot of crewmen use it to actually shoot the enemy off the tank. Now the tank actually has two main parts. It has a hull, and the hull rides on a torsion bar suspension. And there are large wheels on the bottom called road wheels, small wheels on the top called support wheels. In the back there is a large tooth sprocket, has 11 teeth. And a thing called an end connector catches in that sprocket and is driven forward over a compensating wheel. Now when I mean driven, the power pack on an M48A3 is a Continental V12 air-cooled engine, 760 horsepower. The transmission is an Allison cross-drive transmission that then, with couplings, goes to the final drives, drives the sprocket, and gives the tank its ability to traverse terrain, ford, and pretty much take on almost any terrain that its weight doesn't become a disadvantage. One of the other modifications I didn't realize to the M48A3 was to add tail lights to the back of the tank. It never had tail lights, so the tanks could follow in column. The second part of the tank, one other thing about the hull is also the home of where the driver of the tank is. And unlike the tanks that preceded us in World War II, our tanks today, as I mentioned, was an Allison cross-drive transmission. So literally, the driver has a steering wheel, a shift lever, a brake, and a pedal. Full automatic on the tank. It allowed the tank to go forward, reverse, and in neutral, do what we call a neutral steer. That when it's within its own length, it can completely turn. Which is became a great advantage in maneuverability in several of the wars the tank was in. In the turret, which sits on the hull, is able to traverse 360 degrees, and because of the proper conductivity of electricity through the band that is in the cupola that attaches to the hull, allows the tank to have total power electrically all the way through. And like everything we build in America, we always put a backup system. So if the turret cannot be traversed electrically, it could be traversed manually. Now, within the turret, there are 3 crewmen. The first crewman is the gunner. He sits down below the tank commander and to the right of the main gun. And there's a big shield that is here on this side of him. His controls are a periscope and a telescope, a ballistics computer, which has cams cut in it, that when the tank commander calls out what type of round, the gunner ensures that round is on the indicator. Then he's going to put his sights on the target, and the ballistics computer is going to allow for the fall and the drift of the round to the target. That was one thing that made the M48A3 a dead-on tank, along with the crew, bore sighting it and zeroing it. The other person to be able to pull the trigger is the loader. He is to the left of the main gun. And this is as I'm looking forward on the tank, okay? His job is to feed the main gun with the 90mm rounds and to keep the coaxial machine gun fed that comes out of a 10,000 round ready case to feed the ammunition into that. Also in an M48, it's his job, if he has a moment in between feeding the 90, to throw the big casings out because they collect in the turret floor. There's a lot of smoke coming out of them, and anybody that's been in the gunner seat, you know what it's like to be smoked and gassed pretty good and tears coming out of your eyes. The third person is the commander or the tank commander of the tank. Now he actually has a seat behind the gunner up above him, and he can sit on that seat or he can stand on that seat. And his job obviously is to direct fire and tactically maneuver the tank. The gunner, let me back up to the gunner. The gunner has full control. He can shoot the main gun, the coaxial gun, and traverse. The tank commander has what we call the TC override, which sits to his right. So if I'm traversing to a target to the left as the gunner, and a tank commander sees a more danger close target, he can grab the TC's override, it takes complete control out of me. The hydraulic system is what they call a Cadillac hydraulic system. It was actually built by Cadillac. And he can traverse back to that target. He also has the capability to pull the trigger, both on the main gun and on the coaxial 30 cal machine gun. The other thing that makes an M48A3 that was a move in technology was if you are able to range to the target, on the end of the turret there are two bubbles, and a tank commander looks through his scope, and by turning this dial he brings that image to 1. And that information, it's fed down one shaft in the ballistics computer. The gunner has put the type around in, and 2 shafts go back out. And again, those shafts allow for that target. So in other words, if I've got my crosshairs here on the target, when that cam is put in and the range is correct, I might notice that crosshair move slightly. That has adjusted for the fall and the drift of the round to the target, which makes the M48A3 such a deadly and accurate tank. One thing that was unique about the traversing system that Cadillac built for the M48A3, it could traverse at a speed of 24 degrees per second in 360 degrees, which is extremely fast for a turret to move. In fact, I think any of us that ever really cranked it and let it go, we'd hear those gears and we could shake the whole tank. So again, we had a 4-man crew. We have the driver responsible for driving the tank. Usually the driver was the guy that always got out, checked the track, checked the oils, and that kind of stuff. Again, the gunner, his job was again, put the crosshairs on the target, control the main gun, the machine gun, and one other thing that happened in the tank to make all this happen was the fire command. So the tank commander would alert the crew by identifying a target. So in other words, if he said, tank, AT, fire, in that short time, the round is put into the computer, the round is loaded, the loader has said up, which means the safety is off, and the gunner then says, on the way. That happens within 15, 30 seconds at the longest to get the round down range. Well done on that part. Okay, how many tanks do we have? As I said earlier, production was a total of 12,000 tanks. The Marine Corps is, of all the armed forces, other than the Coast Guard, usually one of the smallest forces we have in all of the armed forces. I know that's repetitive. We make up mainly 3 divisions in Marine Corps. We have 1st Marine Division, 2nd Marine Division, and 3rd Marine Division. Our 4th Marine Division is our reserve division. During Vietnam, it was 1st Marine Division, 3rd Marine Division, and later 5th Marine Division came over. Each division rates a battalion of tanks. And each battalion within that has 3 companies. And the tanks kind of make an interesting number here. There's actually 16 gun tanks, 1 dozer tank, and 3 flame tanks for 20 tanks in a company, along with a retriever in each company. So each battalion has approximately 65 tanks, makes up 1 battalion. I did have to take my shoes off to count all that correctly, but I think I got it close. I told you how a tank was basically made up in armament, the main gun, the coax 30, and the 50. Well, one thing that happened in Vietnam is the tanks got customized. And they got customized depending on where we were in Vietnam. For instance, and I'll take it from when we originally landed in Chu Lai in 1966, and I'm going to go on when I landed there. Our tanks were spotless. They were as stock as they could be. They had big yellow numbers on the side. We used to say, which said, shoot me here. we hadn't done anything. We hadn't learned yet through combat experience what had happened. I remember in the tank park in July, after we parked the tanks, and there were several tanks there with red tags on them. And Eau Claire, who did a previous interview with me, we were just privates. And we thought afterwards we were told to go down and use to tarp the tank and do everything just like we were in the States. So we went back down to tarp the tank because we hadn't done that. Well, we got curious about these tanks that had red tags on them. And we climbed up on them. And we saw these little holes in them. And we looked inside. We saw scarring, blood. And this old grumpy gunny asked, "What the hell are you doing?" And we said, "Hey, we're checking this out." He says, "What are you looking?" I said, "Well, what's his holes?" He said, "They're called RPGs." And we honestly said, "What are RPGs?" He says, "You'll find out soon enough." And obviously, within a short period of time, we learned once we got to Nang what those were. So the tanks started carrying track block around them, not only to repair the track, but to give a standoff from an RPG. And some tanks put it top and bottom, wrapped it. As the gunner, the last place you ever took track off that tank was on my side of the tank. It was the flattest side of the turret. And you weren't going to take track from there. The other thing that happened was our armament moving around, not the main gun, but down in the south, because we were not, occasionally we get mortared, but we were not getting the artillery that they were up north. So what we wound up doing is putting the 30 cal machine gun on top of the tank commander's cupola in a short modified tripod and with some sandbags. And then the 50 cal was then, through the efforts of Gunny Jones and Sergeant Funkhauser, who was the lead on the retriever, their ingenuity created a mount to put the 50 cal, now coax with the 50, which became a real advantage down in our neck of the woods in Da Nang in that area for engaging the enemy. So that was a customization we did. They even cut 5-gallon water cans off and put the 50 ammo in to feed the 50. Other tanks had twin 30s. They put a 30 coaxially and a 30 up on top. Some tanks had a 30 coaxial and an M60 up on top. Most of the tanks had grenades up on top. And because we were tanks, one of the other things, we were also pack mules. The infantry would take casualties. We would inherit M14s, M79s. So our armament and our ability to put fire back was quite a lot. One of the things that happened to the tanks over time was in Vietnam, we became victims to the RPG. And part of that was when I first was at Camp Pendleton, we spent a lot of time with the infantry in infantry tank maneuvers, where the infantry would go to the back of the tank on the right rear. There was a phone and they could talk to the tank and help us properly maneuver and at the same time protect us from enemy getting too close. So we would always be able to put our firepower forward for them. As the rotation system changed in Vietnam, we lost that continuity. And with that continuity, the tanks lost protection. And we became easier victims to the North Vietnamese to hit us with RPGs. And mines, nobody could predict where the mines were. And in April of 1966, in 1st Tank Battalion, 25 tanks out of the battalion were deadline due to mine damage. That's way beyond, you know. World War II, we probably would have been all pulled back, regrouped, re-outfitted, but that didn't happen in Vietnam. One of the worst times in the M48A's history was in 1973. most of us are home and we're gone, and the South Vietnamese army is now in control of battling for their freedom for their own country. In one of the first battles they have with the NVA, the Sagar missile is introduced. It's a Russian-made missile, wire-guided. They lose a tank and an ACP. However, the 20th Tank Regiment of the South Vietnamese comes into a major battle, the first major battle in Quang Tri. In that battle, the NVA destroys 110 M48A3 tanks. The worst loss.
These are tanks that were left.
These are the tanks.
By the United States.
Yes, excuse me. These were the tanks that we left. These were our tanks that we got off and we left when we went home back to Okinawa and back to the States. So.
But I think we left those tanks in the good hands of the South Vietnamese army.
Yes, we did. And, you know, it's like any armament in any country. You know, the Russians went from the RPG to the Sagar missile, S-A-G-G-E-R, and then used it on them. If we'd have probably stayed in country, it probably would have got unused on us. In fact, when I read that, I was thinking, you know, timing's everything. Timing is everything because of our lack of infantry coordination. I mean, you know how many times we got stuck out there by ourselves, too far ahead of them, behind us, whatever. That could have been our 110 tanks. So I hope I kind of cleared some stuff up about the M48A3 tank and what it meant to us, how we customized it and used it. Really, as far as terrain, the monsoon was our nemesis, our Achilles tendon. The tanks would bog down. I do remember in the summer we could actually take off and go across a rice paddy. But come the monsoon, it just got soaked so deep you just had no bottom anymore. And we all know what a mess that was, pulling tanks out. Made us a vulnerable target, slowed up the infantry, and could be a problem. But overall, tanks did play a great part for the Marine Corps. I do remember in '69 getting pulled out and the grunts seeing the tanks leave. It was a love-hate relationship with the grunts. We were a big magnet. At the same time, our firepower replaced an entire company of grunts and just firepower out of a tank. And to lose that, they were not happy. I hope I've cleared some things up. I hope I've educated a little bit here. I'm sure some of the guys will look at this and say, you forgot this, you forgot that, but for another time. So thank you for the opportunity, Rich. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick.